How did I single-handedly paint the world's only copy of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel Ceiling? I often look up and ask myself the same question. It was a journey of faith. This is my story of a gift to the Church and to God. English Martyrs Church was originally a Sussex barn built in the 18th century. As the parish of Goring expanded, a larger church was built. It was attached to the barn, which became our church hall. In 1986, my wife, my two daughters and I accompanied Bishop Cormac Murphy O'Connor, our parish priest, Father Enda Norton, and a large party of clergy and parishioners on a pilgrimage to Rome for the beatification of George Haydock and the martyrs of England and Wales. It was there that we met Pope John Paul II and visited the Sistine Chapel. I was impressed by Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling. When I returned home, I looked at our plain church ceiling, which was vast and like an aircraft hangar. It appeared to be the same size as the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and I was filled with a consuming desire to paint a copy of the ceiling on our parish church roof. I measured out our ceiling and compared the length of the Sistine Chapel in Rome to the length of our ceiling in English Martyrs Church. I planned and drew all to scale and worked it all out, and then in early 1987 I approached Father Enda and told him my desire to paint a copy of the Sistine Chapel ceiling upon our parish church roof. It was suggested that I present to the parish samples of what I wanted to do, while Father Enda spoke with Bishop Cormac Murphy O'Connor about the project. I set up a small piece in my back garden, and using my scale drawing and various materials from my workshop, I began to reproduce a small selection of the beginning part of the ceiling on an 8x4 plywood panel. This consisted of lunettes and the prophet Jeremiah over about 6 or 7 panels. One evening I showed the parishioners the panel I had painted of the prophet Jeremiah in the barn, and people were interested and intrigued. Eventually Father Enda told me that Bishop Cormac Murphy O'Connor had given his permission for me to undertake the project, so with excitement I began. My original plan was to paint the entire ceiling on boards at home in my workshop and then screw them up on the ceiling as they were completed. From my plan, I used individual 8-foot by 4-foot sheets of plywood, which I primed and undercoated. I then set out the work directly onto each board using chalk and pencil and sketched out the figures freehand. Then I painted it all using acrylic paints. I used various old books of the original Sistine Chapel ceiling for reference at first, with coloured pages of the old pre-cleaned images. Later on I hired my first tower from a local plant hire, which was about 8 foot by 6 foot wide and 30 foot high. I enlisted the help of my brother-in-law John and 2 friends Steve and Ray, and we put up the panels I had done onto the ceiling. This was on the south side of the church in the corner by the baptismal area. but immediately I encountered a huge problem. By screwing up the pictures onto the ceiling that were completed, I found that I had destroyed most of the pictures. Once the panels were in position, I used stainless steel and brass 2-inch screws which had to be countersunk and filled. I decided straight away that I would have to do the entire painting directly onto the ceiling, by first putting 8x4 boards up and then screwing, filling and rubbing down, priming and undercoating them. Then I would lay out the detail and sketch the figures and set about painting directly onto the ceiling. This was how I was to then paint the whole ceiling. Because I was painting the ceiling in my spare time, I planned all the materials and all that I would need. The sheets of plywood were bought throughout the whole process from a local Worthing timber yard. The acrylic paints were originally purchased from everywhere until I settled into buying from one regular local art shop, who was always pleased to see me arrive. I realized that I would need a vast amount of materials for the whole undertaking, so Father Ender phoned Dulux to sponsor me by supplying all the primers, undercoats and stone colour free of charge for all the work. They agreed and donated the tins of primer, undercoat and stone colour, and I began with 12 tins of each. Whenever I needed more, I would phone up Dulux and a big Dulux lorry would pull up into the church car park and deliver more. It was then suggested that materials could be provided by donations, so a small donation box was organised. It helped me pay for materials ranging from wood, masking tape, screws, filler, acrylics, brushes, and all manner of things. And then I suggested that people might like to sponsor a panel and have a dedication board or a book of remembrance for those who assisted in the work. A local firm of solicitors opened an account at a local art shop for me, and throughout the whole process paid the bill for me at the end of each month. I made all the palettes I used from offcuts, from the 8x4 sheets of ply, and used rolls upon rolls of masking tape. In total, I used approximately 10,000 screws over the whole ceiling, hundreds of tubes of acrylic paint, and many brushes in all types and sizes, from very fine to large bristle sable and nylon brushes. I matched all of my colours on the ceiling using old books on the Sistine Chapel, and set out the complicated architectural background and painted the figures on each panel freehand. I stood and leaned back to paint, and although my neck ached during the process, I have never suffered any neck problems since painting the ceiling. The entire ceiling was also painted using holy water, and I offered the entire project to God, painting the ceiling always in my spare time as my gift to the church. Two years into my work, the original Sistine Chapel ceiling in the Vatican was revealed after years of cleaning. Several books were published with the newly revealed colours. I was awed at the beautiful original colours that had been hidden beneath 500 years of soot and dirt. The colours showed lemons, pinks and greens, and I went back and repainted and touched up my ceiling so as to match and correct it to the original. Several books were published with the newly revealed colours, and I ordered a large set of the limited edition books on the newly cleaned ceiling. I had purposely left 4 lunettes, grey monochrome, waiting for the original ceiling to be revealed, because no existing books had these colours as the ceiling was so dirty. Six months into my painting, local press began to show interest. This was sparked by a photographer at a wedding reception in the barn. He had wandered into the church and had seen the work and me painting, and had asked if he could take some photographs, which I said yes to. Soon all the local papers were interested, and the story was quickly picked up by the national papers. I began to have photographers and journalists from all over the mainstream papers, such as The Guardian, The Times and the Daily Mail, all turning up. Shortly afterwards, the radio and national television networks were interested, and television crews began to arrive. I gave interviews to BBC television and radio, ITV television, local and national news channels, and they ran their stories on the 6 o'clock news, news at 10, breakfast programmes, and soon on programmes ranging from art to children's programmes. Within no time the story had gone international, that someone was painting a replica of the Sistine Chapel ceiling in a small town in the south coast of England. My painting was then continuously interrupted by film crews from CBS, CNN, ABC News, Australian TV, Channel 7, Italian TV, who seemed nervous about another ceiling appearing. Japanese television arrived, and international papers such as Time magazine and Herald Tribune and the Inquirer were all hounding me. Reporters would just turn up, and I realized that I had unwittingly placed myself in the full glare of world view. I was told by CNN that 80 million people had seen my interview, and letters and tourists from all over the world began to arrive, and a worldwide interest developed in the work, all comparing my ceiling to Michelangelo's ceiling. The reaction from the parishioners was always one of support and excitement as the media attention grew.
Well, we think it's very good indeed.
We think it's absolutely fantastic.
I think it's a bit too low, unfortunately. I mean,
it's lovely. At first I wasn't too sure, but as I say, as the work's gradually going on, it's really enhancing the church. So I like it.
I think it's very so nice. I'm not English, but I come from Switzerland, but I live in England. Yeah. I think it's wonderful. Ever so nice.
Gradually, as it's developed, I think it gives everybody a lot of joy.
I personally had no doubts myself, because I knew that Gary wasn't just a doodler or a graffiti doer, shall we say. He was a very good artist.
Our parish priest, Father Ender, and some parishioners organised the little church shop for people to buy souvenirs, and I was often disturbed by interesting and unusual people arriving. The visitors included coachloads of Japanese tourists. Famous actors and famous musicians arrived, Catholic clergy, Greek Orthodox bishops, even Vlad Dracula's descendant arrived from Romania. People of all faiths, groups of Buddhist monks wandering around the church in their saffron robes, atheists and many people involved in the occult who followed me around the church, desperate to examine my hands. The main pleasure of mine was meeting people who had fallen away from the Catholic faith and who hadn't stepped inside a church for decades. They were touched by my work and decided to return to their faith. I had wonderful conversations, and my own faith and love of the Catholic Church deepened and grew as I spent more and more time in the church. The progress of my work was in the papers all the time, so there was constant interest. As the work continued, I decided to buy larger scaffolding and built a more practical platform, which became my workshop with different levels that followed the shape of the ceiling. Bit by bit it was delivered, and it grew into a good solid area in which to work. Eventually, I had everything up there, from paints and brushes to ladders, lighting and handmade boxes that I stood upon to paint. I made benches and screens and set up lighting. I had tea and coffee making facilities, lots of tools, filler and books. I also had a little tape player, which I listened to Gregorian chant and inspiring tapes. I eventually screened myself in so as to sometimes paint without being watched when I needed to make more progress. For a bit of fun, I made a cardboard cutout silhouette of Michelangelo. I illuminated it from behind and left it showing on the screen. I would come down and wander around the church and have a break and listen to people's reactions. Sometimes I could mingle with people and pretend to watch the artist up there, and they wouldn't know it was me. People used to climb up to see me as I was painting, and in the end I pulled up the ladder and sealed myself in so as I could work without being disturbed. Otherwise I would never have got finished. All of the work for the 5.5 years was done in my spare time, between my full-time signwriting job and my private life with my wife and 2 daughters. This meant I would paint late into the night and into the early hours of the morning. The local police would often come and sit in the car park and watch me paint and let me know that they were there to keep an eye out on the church for me. My workshop in the church was always left up during the 5.5 years of painting, so it is present in wedding photographs, baptisms and masses throughout that time. Every 3 months or so, when I had finished the section I had been painting, I had to take the entire scaffolding and workshop down again. This included bringing down all of the contents, including benches, boxes of paints, ladders, etc. And the whole scaffolding was dismantled and removed. When a new section was ready to go up, my friend Stephen Ray would come and hold things for me. And for about the first few years this worked really well, but later on I managed on my own. I had to design the tower carefully when I painted over the sanctuary, and it was at its wobbliest then as I used the least poles. Health and safety would have gone mad if they had seen it. I dropped many brushes and paint onto the carpet in the church from the ceiling. As I held brushes in my mouth during the painting process, I probably consumed at least 3 tubes of paint over the years. The whole ceiling had to be painted in a line across the width from north to south, so that it gradually crept along from west wall to the east. I had to make sure that the central top row of boards was straight all the way along, so that everything else came off of them. My signwriting training was invaluable, as I was able to paint freehand the many miles of straight lines, approximately 6 miles in all, and complicated imitation stained glass windows which were a real pain to do. I recreated a very complicated vaulted ceiling that had to be the correct perspective. If you took away all the pictures and figures, you would see triangles, squares and seats where the prophets sit. This all had to be exact, critically put across the ceiling. Each section had to be perfect, so that the next section would fit perfectly. I simply could not set out the whole ceiling in the beginning and see if it would fit and then paint it. I did it all on faith. I used a small scale drawing, which I followed critically. In the beginning, I drew the whole Sistine Chapel ceiling on a large piece of board to scale. This had all the measurements on. I covered that picture with see-through cellophane and drew 11 rows of 8x4 staggered squares like a brick wall across the whole drawing. When you look at each brick through the cellophane, you saw a bit of the picture. So each brick was a piece of the jigsaw. I could have picked any brick and drawn and painted it several years ahead, and it would have fitted when I reached it. By progressing across, the jigsaw built up slowly. Although my ceiling took 5.5 years, I not only painted the whole ceiling, but I reproduced half the walls as well. 24 popes, leaded light windows, and architectural framework, niches, leaves and acorns. The original Sistine Chapel ceiling has several pieces missing, but my ceiling is unique as it is entire. One particular figure by the center panel of Noah and the flood was partly lost on the original when it fell off and smashed on the floor of the Sistine Chapel after an explosion, and there is only a head and shoulder and arm and 2 feet remaining. Rather than leave the reproduction incomplete, I asked my friend Steve to take the same position and used his image to fill in the missing parts. So Steve is on the ceiling. Also, a bit of the flood scene was lost, and so I filled in the trees that had fallen off the original. Rather than have Pope Julius II's coat of arms, I thought that it was fitting to change the coat of arms to Pope John Paul II's on mine. The proportions of the original Sistine Chapel meant that there was space either side of the ceiling, which is why I had to paint additional complicated windows and popes. During the process of painting the Sistine Chapel, I had to entirely reskin the ceiling with ply panelling. This also meant that I had to seal up 3 ventilation chimneys in the center of the ceiling. There are about 300 to 400 figures on the ceiling. including 6 prophets and 6 sibyls. My favourite figure to paint was the prophet Joel. Halfway through, the loft of the ceiling was insulated because it used to move and expand with the change of temperature during summer and winter. The picture would shrink and it would have gradually damaged the joints. Insulation was pumped into the ceiling, so when it is cold outside, the ceiling is insulated and remains the same temperature. It's about a foot thick. We also had a new addition to the church. An organ was fitted, and so I made mock organ pipes, which were in keeping with the architecture of the ceiling. I also had to take the 6 lights down, and we had new uplighting fitted. There wasn't an appropriate varnish available at the time, so the ceiling was never varnished when it was finished, and it will just mellow with age. With all the interruptions and while trying to earn a living, at the same time as painting, I was given a deadline by the parish to complete it. This meant that I had to spend hours into the night painting to finish it. It was decided that we would have a celebration mass on November the 5th, 1993, for the completion. Bishop Cormac Murphy O'Connor was to preside, and local clergy, the Worthing Chief of Police and dignitaries, the Worthing Mayor and the Duke of Norfolk, various sponsors, solicitors, parishioners, friends and family were all invited. The last pope on the bottom right of the north wall was the final part that I had painted. I remained there late at night, pondering the finished work alone, in the company of the Blessed Sacrament and the little glow of the sanctuary light, which had been my constant companion over these last 5.5 years. When I had finally finished, I asked 2 friends to help me take down the scaffolding. This involved bringing down, for the last time, all of my workshop. Sheets were folded, paints packed up into boxes, brushes cleaned, pallets and masking tape, etc., organised and taken back. Benches, ladders, boxes, my kettle and tea bags, tape player and various objects were removed, and then the poles and the planks taken out of the church into the car park. Amidst tea and breaks and discussions and the attempt to clean the church up after us. The people had never seen the church empty for 5 years, and it looked so huge without my tower. The church was cleaned and hoovered, swept and tidied, and the morning of the 5th of November arrived. The celebration Mass of November the 5th was packed with those invited, parishioners and members of the press. And at the end of the Mass I was surprised to be presented by a medal from Pope John Paul II.
Both is in progress, and since the time it's been completed, thousands and thousands of people have come, not only from within our own diocese, but from much further afield, and indeed from many other countries. Visitors have come here to look and admire this great work of art. And indeed, you know, Gary, next time Pope John Paul comes to England, I shall have to say to him, come down to the English Martyrs, Goring, and you'll feel like you're at home. For a papal award on this occasion to be given to you, Gary, and I'm going now to present you with a papal award pro ecclesia et pontifice. Very appropriate because it's for the Church and for the Holy Father that this particular award. You better turn around. So I have here the medal award which you see, and the citation on behalf of the Holy Father and for the Church. This great honour. Which given by the Holy Father on this occasion. Not for a work well done, not just for you, Gary, not indeed just for the parish, but also for the countless numbers who will see in this reproduction of the Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel painting something to revive and renew their thanksgiving to God and their faith. So again, my warmest congratulations.
When it was all over, it was a strange feeling. I didn't have my workshop at the church anymore, which I had become so familiar with. It had become my little sanctuary. I had many offers to do vast and wonderful projects throughout the world, but I decided to turn them all down, return to my modest life with my family, and continue my signwriting and various other art commissions in churches which I continue to this day. Many years on, the ceiling in our church still continues to be reported in the news, and we receive visitors from all around the world. It is funny to learn that I have become part of game show questions on television, or to have a camera crew turn up and I receive phone calls asking me to come and give an interview. English Heritage is interested in listing the building, which will ensure its preservation in the future. As for me now, I still attend the church regularly and am occasionally found there at odd hours painting the walls or touching up little bits of the ceiling, which I suspect might be a lifetime project.